So the NFU-O partnered with McMaster University and Groundwater to explore the impact of aggregate extraction on farmland. So I'm really pleased to introduce Anne Erlich, who's going to provide context for and details of that research project. And Anne is a retired university professor, health researcher, and practitioner, and in retirement is a member of Groundwater and NFU, and continues her passion for more evidence-based policies with community partnerships, bringing shared learning to action. She's worked in Canada and internationally with NGOs, World Health Organization, the WHO as a consultant to strengthen health systems planning, as well as teaching at the University of Nairobi in Kenya and McMaster University. She also helps run an organic farm with her husband, Nick Greenacre. She was a founding member of the Concerned Citizens of Brant, who fought the many health and environmental risks associated with the Paris Pit, which is a gravel pit on over 600 acres of prime farmland on the Paris water supply. Her professional and personal journey has brought to life what it means to walk the talk about sustainability. So Anne, thanks for starting us off.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you to you and the NFU team for such a rich AGM program. I was reminded yesterday how the wealth of your experience and knowledge really adds a lot to what we're saying, but you probably will bring even more to this when we're talking about the topic of sustainability, because you live it and promote it in your lives, and I think for all of us. I think we're reminded as we're hearing the reflections about last year and Lynda Lukasik's keynote address, how much has truly changed. It's really adding to the topic of sustainability, given that we're seeing a lot of our systems much more fragile than we had seen them to be in the past, even we are. So I'm grateful that we have a panel that has come together, including Lynda, and she's going to give us updates about her important work, as well as allow the work that we did following the concerns many of us had about the risks to sustainable food systems, particularly now with the pandemic. We're seeing not just aggregate extraction, but many other factors as risk factors to sustainability. The team, just to quickly go over who our partnership team is, Pat DeLuca and myself, and then Samantha Lernout and Stephanie Goertz are going to present their work addressing aggregate extraction risks on a wellhead protection. And then Lynda Lukasik will speak at the end with her updates and policy directions that she's very much involved in. So let me just quickly introduce the panel, and then we'll start our presentation. And I know that somebody's keeping time for us. So Stephanie is on our team. She's a biotechnology consultant and farmer. She has a cattle operation north of Guelph. She obtained a PhD at the University of Guelph in molecular biology and an MBA from the University of Toronto. She's a board member at Groundwater, and she and I have worked together on our issues in Paris, as well as hers on Concerned Residents Coalition Against the Hidden Quarry, which was proposed for the Rockwood, Ontario area. Then Pat DeLuca, who I worked with many years ago, mapping primary health care services in Hamilton. And he's certainly an expert, and I learned a lot and suddenly thought, well, maybe we can do some more mapping when it comes to farm. Geographic information science professional. He teaches at the School of Earth and Environment and Society at McMaster University. He teaches numerous courses in geographic information science, remote statistics. He has research interests in quantitative methods in geography and GIS, air quality monitoring, modeling and mapping, regional variations in quality of health and healthcare, environment and health, remote sensing of the environment. He is also a co-author of the award-winning Code Red series, which is published in the Hamilton Spectator. And so really truly is part of the bringing data to community processes and disseminating data, so to speak. So I'll do the other introductions for the team after we've done our presentation, if that's okay. And I'll start briefly by just mentioning that in our team, we included, we had a great support from Annika Chang, who was a student intern and had been with Pat DeLuca in his course, and she was truly a strength and brought a lot of her expertise that you'll see when we. Sarah is also part of the partnership and has been an important team member to help with our planning process and partnership process, and we'll be together as a partner group. Pat, next.
And I think you've frozen.
Yep, definitely.
Oh yeah, and do you want to try turning off your video?
Okay.
Sometimes that helps.
Okay, thanks. So many of us are hearing about sustainability from global to local, and I just wanted to reinforce that many of us don't realize how much the commitment actually has been not only federally, because Canada is a signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN proposed in 2015, which we're supposed to meet by 2030. But more has been done recently to look at how to bring the concepts to a local level and local planning level. And you'll see just how important when we're looking at sustainable food systems, Global Development Goals 1, which is no poverty, 2, zero hunger, 13 is climate action, we're looking at water. So all of them are very much interrelated when you're looking at the many determinants to health that speak to our health system. Next. I'm sure many of you know and reinforce the definition that we are looking at in terms of sustainability is meet without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And many cultures, including our Indigenous communities, really reinforces in their practice models of sustainability and are important to bring together when we're working in our communities. The Brundtland hosted at the time by Brundtland, who was a physician, really took that concept of multiple determinants to health from a global level to a local level. And she was a lead in looking at health systems changes that are intersectoral. Next. So when we go down to our concerns right now with the risks that gravel extraction poses to prime farmland and sustainable food systems, this is just a view from a farm near Wilmot Township, which Samantha and Steph will speak of. Pat, I don't know if you can, yeah, with just see, though it may not be as clear to all of you, but that gravel pit in Wilmot Township is an example of many that you've probably seen behind, sometimes not seen because they're hidden behind berms, but there's such a scar on the environment, on the landscape, and speak to many other risks and determinants, not just the visual landscape features, but what we often don't know what happens below that. Although we also want to ensure that people consider all of this in our analysis of where and how these pits be addressed in terms of risks and benefits.
2 minutes.
So I'm just going to leave this for now because we have to carry on with our other presenters. Pat, do you want to go ahead into the maps?
Sure. So basically, well, my role was to provide a student who could do some of the mapping, you know, and certainly, you know, I helped guide that student in the results that you're going to see in a few moments. So really, we're talking about mapping of the prime farmland, mapping of the aggregate resources. How does that relate to the prime agricultural soils? That would really be, sort of the key parts that I would have been involved with. So, the types of maps we produced a series of maps. We boiled them down to just a few here to show you, looking at the agricultural land base for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, looking at soil classifications, kernel density, density estimation maps. So these are looking at clusters, if you will, of aggregate sites, where they're located, where they're not located, and then a map correlation of that with prime farmland. So we use geographic information systems for this. This is something I've been working with since like 1992, I think now. So a long time. Authoritative data sources. We didn't just pull this out of thin air. So boundaries come from Stats Canada. Soil, prime farmland comes from OMAFRA. We have aggregate pits from authoritative sources as well. And, we're not covering all of Ontario. The caveat here is we're covering what is in the database, in essence, right? So this is what we have at our disposal. So we understand that certainly, it's not perfect coverage for the entire province. So this is an example of a density map. And this is looking at both the authorized active and inactive aggregate sites. And the, if you look at the legend, really all we're trying to show here really is just where is there a high density of aggregate sites versus a low density. So, and you could probably, more or less pinpoint yourself on the map and you can see where you are in relation to the rest of the province. But certainly, down in the area that, the sites that I went to visit just outside of Paris, I mean, that's in this area down here. I mean, certainly there is a high density there of aggregate extraction sites. If we zoom into the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, the pattern, so the way density estimates work, because it is a density, depending on the geography, which can act as kind of the container, if you will, obviously density is somewhat related to that. And so the pattern isn't, drastically different from what you saw in the previous map, but certainly here you can see a bit of a refined picture, if you will. Again, showing the areas of high density, the darker colors, the yellows are lower density, and then also the relationship with the green belt. Here is our map of soil classification. So 1 to 3 being prime, prime soils, and then 4 to 7 is, still important, obviously. But we'll see in the area that we are, where the university, well, I mean, no soil around the university, but you know what I mean. In Southern Ontario is mostly 1, 2, and 3. Here is the percentage of active and inactive sites on prime farmland in the Golden Horseshoe. And, you can see in some cases, it's close to, most of the, when we read the legend here, most of the highest class here is that most of the aggregate sites are on prime farmland, right? That's the takeaway here in these darker areas. And, in some cases, like say, North Burlington, where we're, less than 20% of the aggregate activity happens to be on prime farmland, right? So when we look at, what we found overall, about 77.3% of aggregate activities are located on prime farmland in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And that compares favorably to some of the other work we've seen from other government agencies. So, they've obviously extended further than the Golden Horseshoe, but, they're showing 83% in their cases. So we're within the ballpark here. And, certainly, we need to look at the impact on classes 4 to 7. I mean, we haven't really done that in this case. We're just down, in areas of 1 to 3 primarily. But I think, in part, we're trying to show here, we're trying to build some evidence here. And that's really what we're doing by creating maps like this, growing evidence of, the fragility of our food systems. So I think this is now Stephanie's turn.
Yes, it's mine. And thanks, Pat. Growing evidence is what we need, because the current policy directions with respect to the Ford government are really based on reducing, as the government states, reducing the red tape. It makes it easier for developers. It makes it easier for aggregate extractors. And so that trend has been pushing forward in all of the policies listed below. A place to grow, growth plan for growing the golden horseshoe. I think if you asked anyone who was looking at any of these reviews, they would say that very development based, very pro-development based. We've just reviewed the Aggregate Resources Act in Ontario. And again, lots of wiggle room for aggregate companies to make things a lot easier for them. Recently, amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act have made it clear that the environment and endangered species are way down on the list with respect to the Ford government. Again, More Homes, More Choice Act. It's just the recipe for urban sprawl. Now, our basic policy statement does protect farmland. It does protect sustainability of the food system in a way, but it doesn't make farming and land conservation a top priority. In fact, if you look at what we call the aggregate impact assessment guidance document, I'm sorry I haven't put it here, that's coming out from OMAFRA, you can see that the policy statement does not mitigate counties or municipalities to actually analyze what impact any development or aggregate extraction would have on farmland. Municipal and county official plans also help with respect to protecting farmland, but there's a lot, again, of wiggle room. I want to emphasize the Greenbelt plan now that's under review. There's an ERO consultation form that you can go to. We're looking at expanding the Greenbelt. Ford has done this basically because there's been such an outcry to not touch the Greenbelt with many of the several cases in the past year where Ford has stated he was going to go into the Greenbelt and let development happen, and the public just shut it down. The other policies that help us protect farmland, of course, and I haven't listed all of them, is the Oak Ridges Moraine, the Niagara Escarpment Protection Plan. And also, one of the most concerning things that I find now is that the government, the Ford government, is putting out so many ministerial zoning orders, which just take out the public input totally. Now, with respect to the agricultural, could we go on back to the next slide? The next slide. I'm just showing you, just going back to the Greenbelt expansion. This is the whole big map of the Blue Belt expansion, for example, the Oak Ridges Moraine expansion plan, but I'm just going to focus on that dark green area. This is called the Periscope Moraine, and this is where the Ford government has decided to start the study of how to expand the Greenbelt. So that would be very important because this is our source of water for many of the private well owners and municipal wells in that area. The other part of this study with respect to the Greenbelt expansion is that they're going to be looking at urban valleys, and these contain all of the streams and the headwaters, and that's going to be focused, if you see that pink area, that's going to be focused right around Toronto and lower down into Hamilton. And so that's interesting that in this study, they'll basically be expanding the protection of these urban valleys to privately owned as well as publicly owned valleys. So that's a great boost. So in a way, the Ford government is turning a little bit towards the environment, and I think I'll finish there. Anne?
Yeah, no, thanks, Stephanie. I'm gonna
I think we've lost Anne, so can our next presenter on our panel jump in and start? Because we're running a little bit behind.
Sure, I think that would be us. So Steph is going to share screen, And while she gets going, I will just sort of introduce who we are, Steph and I, who Steph Goertz and I are. So Stephanie and Steph, this is another Steph. I don't know if we'll need Anne to stop sharing, but I'm gonna let Steph work away at that, getting our slides up. So I'm Samantha Lernout. I live in Wilmot Township, which is within the region of Waterloo. And Steph Goertz is also lives in Wilmot Township in the region of Waterloo. And we have developed this group, Citizens for Safe Groundwater. So this is our outline. We'll try to quickly skim through who we are, what we've been doing with the region's official plan review, some interaction of resources that we've identified, our direction, food and water first, and just zoning in on what we're currently working on, which is the Hallman pit. So next slide, please, Steph. Thanks, Steph. So just to sort of situate ourselves, we are in the region of Waterloo, which is circled there in red. It's in Ontario, so just so you can understand where we are. Thanks, Steph. Next slide. So who is Citizens for Safe Groundwater? We formed in response to an application for a gravel pit, the Hallman pit in Wilmot Township. It's on top of approximately 200 acres of prime farmland in Wilmot Township. There are three resources here that we're looking at. There's prime farmland, there's aggregate, arguably the quantity and quality is arguable, and the Waterloo Moraine sits below this, so a massive groundwater source that provides water for a ton of people. So the region of Waterloo is currently reviewing their official plan. I think, Steph, you're going to speak to that. Go for it, Steph.
Yes, so the Waterloo region is doing their official plan, the 2041, and because Waterloo region is one of the fastest growing communities, there is huge pressure that there's a need for aggregate for building houses and building roads. And so that's the argument of the government saying, you need roads, you need houses, therefore you need aggregate, therefore you should allow these aggregate pits close to the location where you need them. The only problem is that Waterloo region is also one of the top food producing and has one of the highest amounts of quality of soil for production next to Niagara Falls or Niagara area. And so there's this conundrum of pressure for housing and roads, while also pressure for securing our food production, our safe drinking water, and just make sure there's green spaces.
Yes, so Steph and I delegated to the Committee of the Whole at the Region of Waterloo a few weeks back about we've sort of identified 10 major concerns that we have that we'd like the staff and council to consider as they review their official plan. So of I would say most interest, I'm going to assume to everybody here this morning, would be number 5, the cross-functional interaction of agriculture and these other resources of aggregate and water. So we can go to the next slide. So I mentioned earlier, within the region of Waterloo, there's this beautiful, arguably best water source in the world, according to Wilf Ruland, a hydrogeologist, one of the greatest, largest sources. I should have an exact quote for you. I'm sorry that I don't, but I've heard lots from him about why this is worth protecting. It's a massive water source. And atop that is aggregate sources. And sorry, just back to that slide, Steph. So aggregate serves to clean the water. Sand and gravel serve to clean the water. It's another term that most people use as natural capital. So just ask yourself, if I know there's a lot of individuals here that have that farm. So ask yourself, are you sitting above a water source, and are you sitting above aggregate? Because this is an important thing to consider. Next slide, Steph. So and it's not just the one application. So often an aggregate application comes along And just if you look at the screen, Steph, maybe if you can just show where the proposed Hallman pit is. Yes, so that's the new application, that 200 acres of farmland. But below it, south of it, there is a full county block that's already licensed and not currently in use. There's small little sections that are currently being drawn from, but most of it sits abandoned and dormant. And it's the cumulative impact of all of these on our sustainable food systems that we need to consider. And if we keep going like this, what are we going to be left with for food and water? So this one's Steph, go for it.
Yeah, so Sam, you kind of mentioned this is the lack of rehabilitation back to farmland, and that, you know, the government and other aggregate kind of officials are saying that land can be rehabilitated back to farmland. But, you know, there is documentation from the National Farmers Association, as well as others, that say, you know, you've had hundreds of thousands of years to put the soil on this ground to, you know, increase the biodiversity and the quantity or quality of that soil. You can't just simply take soil from other areas, drop in this area, and then expect it to turn back into prime farmland. And so when they talk about rehabilitation, they don't talk about rehabilitation back to the state of what it was, but rehabilitation that it means that it could be used for something else, such as, you know, a park or a grassy meadow. So we're just kind of looking at, you know, what does this mean when they talk about aggregate and prime farmland? And then we're going to talk about looking at interaction of prime farmland and aggregate. It's not just us looking at this stuff. There's tons of other organizations that are looking at aggregate and prime farmland, such as Hold the Line, looking at, you know, local food and agriculture. Our farmers' lands are not a blank slate. They're productive pillars of our local food system. Other organizations that are looking at this is obviously Wellington Water Watchers, Ontario Headwaters, Grand River Environmental Network, Wilmot Even Horticulture, the Canadian Law Association. So these are people that we've worked with at this specific, during this application time. And we've also worked with other experts in the University of Waterloo. So there's lots of people that are looking at the detriment of aggregate on prime farmland. And what we found is that there's, go ahead.
I just want to thank National Farmers Union as well for, when this application came out, a very, very effective letter of support for protecting this piece of property, the Hallman pit. And I'm happy to share that with anybody who has more interest in that letter itself.
Yeah. So the next one is, is aggregate extraction more beneficial for water than farming? So the argument is often made that extraction will eliminate the nitrate loading due to the application of fertilizer. So the pit will have a beneficial effect on water quality, is what they're saying. But this implies only for the period of active excavation. And so if you look through the Grand River Conservation Authority's documents, sorry. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, Helen.
2 minutes.
Sorry. So look at the application for, distraction. So I'm going to quote something for you from Michael Friend. It's the potential of short-term beneficial effect in water quality must be weighed against the permanent loss of protective cover of the aquifer due to extraction removal. And will it be properly rehabilitated after conclusion of extraction? Okay, so Sam.
Yeah, and I can help you out there. I know the feeling of being distracted by your little ones. I have a 5-month-old sleeping upstairs. Ooh, hopefully, knock on wood, that she keeps sleeping, and I have 2 boys too. So this is difficult. We've been trying to do this with young children. But anyways, just going back to what Steph said, this argument is made by the Ontario Stone and Sand and Gravel Association, and they have their interests at heart. And we hear it from people, and it's very, very frustrating to us. So we're grateful to have Emil and Michael Friend from the University of Waterloo. Emil Friend is the professor who developed the Groundwater Institute, who told the region of Waterloo, you don't need a pipeline to Lake Erie if you just protect what you have. He's freaking amazing. He's been so helpful to us, and they've provided a lot of helpful quotes for us to share. That argument is, I don't even have words for it. So anyways, I know that everybody in this audience understands that. So just going to the next slide, this is the letter that our neighborhood received from Jackson Harvest Farms. Rick Esba of Tri-City Materials, who sold his last 2 licenses to the Miller Group for millions of dollars, is representing himself as Jackson Harvest Farms to the neighbors as he wants to share his plans to turn this into a gravel pit. It seemed quite familiar to a group. When I described this to the Food and Water First group that stopped the mega quarry, this sounded quite familiar. That's it? Okay, so just if I can let everyone know, our plans are to collaborate with the Wellington Water Watchers, who have had some success with the Campbellville Quarry in Milton, if you've heard of that, and the Stratford Glass Plant, and Food and Water First, and that's where we're going from there. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thanks. Anne, how's your internet? Do you want me to jump in and talk
That's
about breakout rooms?
No, that's great. No, we've got Lynda still.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, if that's okay. I know this is pretty full, but Lynda Lukasik is a co-founder and the executive director of Environment Hamilton. It's a Hamilton-based not-for-profit focused on providing Hamiltonians with knowledge and skills to enhance and protect the environment around them. Lynda has a background in science, environmental studies, and holds a PhD in planning from the University of Waterloo. Her current work at Environment Hamilton is focused on advocating for the city to commit to freezing the urban boundary to prevent more prime agricultural land from being gobbled up by the suburban sprawl. So welcome, Lynda, and I know that we're
Thanks so much, Anne.
Thanks, Lynda.
I've got some slides, so I'm quickly going to share my screen here. And just get myself to the start. All right. So as Anne said, I work with Environment Hamilton. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of the organization. And I just want to say kudos to the mums out there who are advocating for a change in the world, and thank you for that. I'm just thinking about future generations, and mums are a force to be reckoned with. So I applaud both of you for all that you're doing. We thank you greatly for that. I think that needs to be said. So I just want to very quickly give you an update. I did present to all of you last year. It's hard to believe it was like in the before times a year ago when we were all together in person. So I want to give a very quick update on some of the things that have happened since I talked to you last. And I always like to share these stats, which I know all of you know, and just underscoring the fact that we've already lost too much when we think about farmland in Ontario. So these are the Farmland Trust's data. 18% of our farmland has been lost in the last 40 years. Only 5% of the land in the province can support farming. We're still losing huge amounts of farmland every day. And if the trends continue, we're going to lose the ability to be self-sufficient in food production by 2036. And that's terrifying. I mean, if you think about the fact that we're already in the start of a decade that's urgent as far as taking aggressive climate action to avert major climate catastrophe. And that includes paying very close attention to food security. So I'm going to say it now more than ever before, it's urgent that we figure out all of these pieces. And you've seen these maps already. I always like to share the fact that we've got our green belt area, the protected countryside that includes Niagara Escarpment, the countryside, the Oak Ridges Moraine. It's surrounded by municipalities that are growing. There's huge pressure there. You've heard already about what this Ford government has doing since I spoke to you last. Things have not gotten better. As you've already heard, we've got other problems, MZOs, Conservation Authorities Act, a land needs assessment methodology that prioritizes market demand for determining the kind of housing that we need. So it's a very intentional and direct effort to undo all of the good that had been done in previous years to create a growth planning process that's designed to curb sprawl, to create more compact climate resilient communities. So to me, this is just so wrong on so many levels that we're heading in this direction, that our government, provincial government is driving us in this direction, when we can all see that we need to drastically change course. So I wanted to share some data for Hamilton too, because that's where I'm focused. We know from the municipality itself that between 1981 and 2006, we lost 16% of our farmland. In 2015, this increased to 17.6% with a pretty major urban boundary expansion to create the Aerotropolis, the city's airport employment growth district. And we also know that these losses are going to increase to greater than 20% if we allow our municipality to proceed with plans to expand the urban boundary into our remaining white belt land. Just put a map up here quickly. You've probably heard the term white belt. It's essentially the land, it's rural land wedged between an urban area. And you can see for us in Hamilton, that's the gray area, and the green belt. So this is unprotected rural land. Some of us view it as a food belt, and it should be protected in that manner by incorporating it into the green belt. Others view this land as urban expansion area and waiting. So that's where we're at in Hamilton, and the discussions are heating up and they're fierce, but I can happily tell you that more and more people are stepping up and asking questions and raising concerns about what we might see happen here. I'm just zeroing in on an area within that white belt known as the Elfrida lands, and this is the Lear score for this area. So of course, the darker the green, the better the quality of the agricultural land. So you can see this is prime agricultural land that we're talking about that we simply can't afford to lose right now. So we've been organizing really intensively at Environment Hamilton. And so we're saying to the community, don't let sprawl take it all. We cannot afford to lose these white belt lands. And so we have a petition going and encouraging people to sign it. And this is largely because there's a climate emergency and our municipality declared it. And I always like to share this example, you know, the more compact the urban form is, the more climate friendly. And this comparison between sprawling Atlanta and compact high quality of life Barcelona really underscores that reality. We're looking for different approaches, missing middle, gentle density, higher density where it makes sense, paying attention to active transportation, and getting us to where we need to be. But also, I think recognizing, you know, I didn't speak to the aggregate issue, but I think you all know that the more you sprawl out, the more aggregate you're going to need to consume to support the infrastructure and everything else. So these pieces all come together by creating climate resilient communities, protecting our agricultural land. We're going to head in a better direction overall. So I'll stop there, and thanks so much for the opportunity to provide an update today.
That's great. Thanks, Lynda. I know that we're really getting into some time crunches here on for this panel presentation. And so I just want to get back to how much time do we have, Sarah, right now for breakout rooms? And then we might have to cut short.
We've done some behind the scenes math, and you've got 15. We're going to do 15 for breakout rooms and about 10 minutes for reporting back. So.
Okay, well, that's good. I just wanted to say, in the conversations we're going to have in breakout rooms, what you're experiencing within your own communities and your lives right now with risks to sustainable farmland and sustainable food and determinants. We want to bring something down to how do we strengthen our local capacity to monitor and work together. So in other words, when I presented those sustainable development goals, we want to level so we really can think about how we operationalize them. And Lynda, we talked a little bit about that last year at your presentation, and what would we need to have our conversations supported by the evidence and the data and the stories that really enable our communities to continue their work with that kind of evidence and support. So those are the focus of our conversations now. And for your suggestions about next steps, we'd really like some positive, like some next steps that we can put together and summarize after this meeting and put out there for us to really get engaged with. Is that right, Sarah?
Yep. So so we're going to move into breakout rooms. You're going to see a pop-up inviting you to join a breakout room. Please click accept. Phone users, I believe, will automatically be put in the breakout room. In each room, there will be a facilitator, myself and one of your presenters. We're going to need a designated note taker and someone to report back to the general group with just some high level. We're only going to have 10 minutes, so we'll be brief. And for the note taker, we are going to ask that you email me, and I'll put my email in the chat with the notes, because this conversation is not going to end today. You know, we've scheduled a little over an hour for it, but that's obviously not enough time. I think we've got everybody back. I know our group had some great conversation, And we probably could spend the entire day on this topic. Unfortunately, there's a few other pieces of business to do, but we did want to take some time for some report backs from the group. So I will be unfair and call on our group first, because I know I asked Phil if he would just do maybe you get a 1-minute summary of the discussion, but also we're mostly interested in your answers to question 2. How can we be involved, and how can we in the land use planning? Because I think we recognize it's complicated, and as the chat was showing us, nuanced. So maybe Phil, can you start us off?
Sure, I'm going to be attempt to be brief. Thorny question. Get involved in your local municipal official planning process. There seems to be a fair number of them happening right now around the province. Actually, we're right in the middle of one in this region. But with regards to aggregate extraction, it is a complex issue and a thorny issue, because the balance when trying to preserve farmland is recognizing that we need densification in urban areas. And one way you the only way you get densification, if you're building up, is to use aggregate. So it's another layer of complexity. There's plenty of other things to talk about, and we did, but I'll limit it to that.
Thanks, Phil. So Steph Goertz, your group, who's reporting back from your group, can they jump on and tell us maybe a 1-minute summary focusing on question 2?
Don here, Don Saperis. I took notes of breakout room 1 with Steph Goertz. Also one was Diane Dowling, Ken Bassendale. The question that Steph posed was, what threats to food, water have you seen on your farm? And Diane pointed out abandoned gravel pits on 1,000 islands are an issue. The provincial policy statement says nice things about farms, but change when gravel pits are mentioned. And Steph replied, the government knows this. Ken Bassendale expressed concerns of the wind turbines and gravel pits, wind turbines on his farms and gravel pits that are necessary as part of his farming business. Steph replied, what things could be done? Should tasks be delegated to municipal governments more? A group called Countryside Line encourages development to be concentrated, and perhaps they have the answers. Consider alternatives, possibly green infrastructure. We talked a bit about green infrastructure as an alternative to gravel. Diane Dowling suggests that keeping development going. Regardless of what happens, seems to be a preoccupation. Steph replied, the Food Water Group is quite vigilant with mobilizing people, such as farmers and chefs. People get that idea. Food Water Group works, working closely with Gravel Watch, but she concluded by saying that we need farm support.
Thanks, Don.
In their efforts. Thank you.
I'm wondering if I could just jump in, talking about innovation and green infrastructure. The idea that we need farmer supports and coming up with alternatives to aggregate. There's hemp and there's other materials that could be used for building of roads and building of buildings and structures, and that if we had the farmer support and rallying and showing these innovative solutions for alternatives, it would be key.
I see, Hillary, you've got a question? I'm assuming this question.
Yeah, just an immediate thought to Steph's comment there, though. And it's the same as with electric cars replacing fuel cars. Well, if we have hemp replacing aggregate, then we're talking about monocultures. We're still talking about the same beast in a way, in a different form. And I think that what is the answer? That's for me, it's always conservation. It's less, it's having enough. It's, all those things, but I just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Thanks, Hillary. I think that was one of the things we acknowledged, and I think we saw that in the chat early on, is like, this is, we can't solve this in an hour. It's super complex because yeah, I think that's the difficult part, is looking at all of those nuances. So thank you. Anne, your group, who was your reporter back in Erlich?
Yeah, Kate Garvey was with us. She took notes and is going to report back. Kate?
Yeah. So our group talked about a few examples around the province. One of them was a casino on top of a marsh that's near the north side of Lake Nipissing. So there's concerns around water quality there, and that's something that went through with the Ford government. And then around Ottawa, there was the urban boundary expansion this spring, and now the council's backpedaling on not expanding onto prime farmland. And then we have aggregate extraction extensively west of Ottawa, so we're losing a lot of farmland. And then Zora Township is one of the top aggregate producing areas in the province, and also area with a lot of prime farmland. And also for local 305 in the Caledon area, there's a lot of concern around the 413 highway because it will be going through prime farmland and will also use a lot of aggregate, which is arguably for an unneeded highway. And then we also discussed how we as farmers should consider how we use aggregates. And it was noted that actually 20% of aggregates go to the United States. So we can have discussions around how we could have better supply management of aggregate that is extracted in Ontario. And then we also talked about alternatives, like the other group said, like the hempcrete and recycled aggregates.
Great, thanks, Kate. I think we also wanted to quickly mention, we talked about some leadership that looked promising in Zora Township, where really, again, you're talking about how do you connect with those who are supporting how we look at this complex matter more within our communities and the leadership that's there.
Thanks.
Sarah?
Yep. Pat mentioned he had to jump off because he's got a class coming up, but who from Pat's group wants to report back?
I took a few notes and then Mara took some others as I ran out of paper because we had a lot to say. We talked about a couple of examples. Hillary's got quite a situation surrounding her. I apologize, there's a cat trying to climb onto my leg right now, painfully. But it's a huge operation in Lernout County, and they're ignoring a lot of the regulations, and there's challenges around hearing back from MNR supposed enforcement officers, and how the enforcement mechanisms have been hollowed out over time. And there was some discussion about how large of a territory a very small amount of people are supposed to be covering in terms of enforcement, and whether or not they're in those positions for too long and perhaps comfortable with and have these comfortable relationships with people that they're supposed to be overseeing. And then there was question about at what scale the regulations kick in for farmers who might be doing extraction on their own land and potentially skirting rules. And let me just see here, a lot of questions around zoning. Mara, did you have anything else to
I've got two more groups in 3 minutes, so I might have to cut you off, Katie.
That's fine.
But I think we'll wrap things up in a minute and we'll summarize. But so Lynda, Lukasik's group, can you tell me what, maybe you get about 1 minute, apologies.
Yeah, Anna shortly is going to report back for us.
Yep. So our group focused kind of more on the disconnect between what we see in policies and then how that actually gets implemented on the ground, as well as a lot of the, in the past year, a lot of the peeling back of some policies that we've been putting in over the past few decades to protect prime farmland. So in particular, we had comments on the Hamilton area and then also Ottawa area still seeing a lot of farmland being kind of gobbled up either by aggregate extraction, but also urban expansions. And just sort of the frustration with, even though there's a lot of groups kind of doing great work trying to, actually implement the policies we have that say you have to avoid prime farmland and conservation policies and things like that. It still seems like it's not quite getting implemented on the ground exactly. We're still seeing development go towards prime farmland and not really consider other areas that may be better suited for urban development. And then we also briefly kind of mentioned the latest Growing the Greenbelt campaign, kind of looking at the area that they're looking at, the Periscalt Moraine, is really close to a lot of that density of aggregate extraction. So potentially opportunities there to argue to look beyond just the Periscalt Moraine in this consultation, and also to just improve policies in general in the Greenbelt and also outside the Greenbelt around aggregate extraction. And then one last point was also looking at building more of recyclable materials rather than opening up new aggregate pits. So not just seeing that, in order to, we need some aggregates to build things, but we don't necessarily have to go to virgin aggregate pits. We can look at what we can use for recyclable materials.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I think those are good points. Steph and Samantha's group, who's reporting back from there? You've got 1 minute max.
Okay, this is Max reporting back. So I'm just down the road from Hillary. So we also talked briefly about her situation. I did mention that there's a lot of small quarry and aggregate extraction going on in our area, which is Lernout County, so just outside of Ottawa. There's a lot of farms that you see have ripped up what were once productive fields in order to get short-term aggregate payouts, because the yield per year is a lot higher than trying to farm in our class 4 to 7 farmland area. Samantha, though, related that the same thing is true even on prime farmland, that the short-term payout is actually great enough to even destroy the prime farmland. Stephanie mentioned that farming on the Canadian Shield in little pockets hasn't been affected too much by aggregate extraction due to the difficulty and lack of aggregate there. Diane said she's not, sorry, that was Diane. Stephanie connected the quality of farmland to it being above aggregates. Wherever you have prime farmland, that is generally where you do find those good aggregates. And Tony mentioned a separate issue that aggregate extraction is not a large issue in his area, but did express concern that an old quarry near him is being used as a landfill, which is a whole separate issue, which would also therefore affect the quality of the water underneath the old quarry.
Thanks.
That's what I have to say. Stephanie, did you have something to add?
That's great.
Thank you. I'm going to have to, unfortunately, I think we could probably, like I said, spend the entire day on this issue. And I think who just mentioned, I apologize, I should have written it down. The Growing the Greenbelt consultation is open. The NFU-O will be responding to that. So any feedback, we will be also looking to you for feedback in helping our response. And this obviously will help guide that response as well. So I want to thank all of our presenters for this wealth of information and for all of your support in this project. Personally, it was very interesting to learn so much more about Hold the GIS mapping and that those impacts on prime farmland in a really statistical way. But now I'm going to turn it back over to our chairs, and thank you everyone for your thoughts and participation. And a reminder for those of you who took notes to please email me. I'll throw my email in the chat in just a second.